Welcome back to In Business. Many of us know about demographics. That's how we know who's buying our products and services. But when it comes to psychographics, it's a whole different story. Why do customers buy what they buy, and why do they buy from us? Do we ever ask? To help us with this topic are two experts in the field. Michael Johnson is a professor at Trias College, a business college with campuses in many cities in southern Ontario. Also with us is Neville Pockroy of Mastermind Solutions, a Peel Region-based company that develops strategic plans for businesses, and Neville is responsible for the strategic marketing side of the business for clients. You will also know Neville from our weekly Marketing Minute, right here on In Business. Michael, Neville, thanks for coming into the show.
Thanks for having us.
So, first of all, Michael, define demographics for the audience, because demographics that's important in the marketing game as well.
Absolutely. Knowing exactly who your customer is absolutely paramount. So being able to find the people who will buy from you, very important to actually segment your market and find those individuals. So for demographics, knowing where to find them is extremely important.
Now, what are some of the demographics that people should be looking at, not just where they're located, but a lot more information?
Well, knowing who it is. For instance, if you wanted to sell to senior citizens, you would have to know whether or not they have money, whether or not they're male or female, whether or not they have children. All of these factors, including whether or not it's a single parent or it happens to be a large group of people, knowing how they buy is extremely important.
So we want to know everything about them. We want to know gender, we want to know sex, we want to know race, some religion, where they are, how much they make, everything that we can possibly know about them.
Absolutely.
Because so many people say, when I ask them, I said, so who's your perfect client? They say, oh, everybody's my client. I said, oh, the ones that have no money, you want those ones too? Well, maybe I don't want those ones. and some people say that even more important than demographics is psychographics. Neville, help us understand what the psychographic side of things is.
Well, psychographics is more about attitudes and personality and beliefs, and it's pretty much everything in consumers' minds rather than who they physically are. It's the way they think, it's the way they operate, it's the way they relate with other people.
There was an interesting story that I had heard about psychographics, and it was psychologists had come up with this study that said the closer something was to our mouth, the more brand loyalty there was to that product. And so they did a study, and they went around the room and they asked people, they had males and females in the room, and they asked people what brand of socks they had on. And the women were very good at it. They kind of knew it was on their feet. The guys were terrible at it. They had no idea what was on their feet. It was whatever was on sale, what my wife bought me. And then they asked everybody what brand toothpaste they used. And everyone knew what brand toothpaste they used. So proving their theory that the closer something is to your mouth, the more brand loyalty that you have.
There's a strong possibility there because certain parts of the brain that are dealing specifically with pleasure have a tendency to look backwards in time to when you were a child. So putting something close to the mouth is almost pacifying the individual and kind of giving them that instant reward. So there is a tendency to remember things much quicker when you do have something near your mouth. Scents, smells, things like that, definitely.
So all of those things that happen up around our main senses, marketers can capitalize on that and really bring forward a product that capitalizes on those particular senses.
Yeah, I think the average person is very vain, and anything that other people can see or relate to is something that they will be concerned about, more so than something that is hidden, like a pair of socks. So anything that people can see, consumers will be more concerned about and will be more brand loyal if they perceive that it'll make them be seen in a different light.
Look better, smell
Absolutely.
better.
Absolutely.
Or even feel better.
Absolutely.
And now these things are done in a B2C type of marketplace. Mike, can we use psychographics in the business marketplace as well?
Absolutely. It depends entirely on what your market is and what your product is and how you want to bring it into the marketplace. But absolutely, because the brain itself doesn't necessarily do things that are logical. It does things that are emotional. And one of the things that science has discovered recently is we tend to move towards the emotional release and also the enjoyment, that immediate satisfaction. And when there's a conflict between the logical and the emotional, it's always the emotional that wins.
The emotional will win out.
Always.
Now, Neville, you deal in the corporate world in advising customers or your clients on strategic marketing plans. And some might argue that in the business world, it's different from the consumer world, that there isn't that strong emotional buy. What's your feeling on that?
Oh, absolutely. I think most people will understand that decisions ultimately, while the average consumer, whether they're B2B or B2C, make a logical decision, but a lot of that logic is driven by the emotional. And it doesn't matter if it's a consumer-oriented product or a business product. At the end of the day, it's all about what's right for me as the consumer, whether I'm a business or a consumer product kind of consumer.
So it really doesn't matter. It's going to always be an emotional buy of one sense or another.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So that now what we need to do is we need to find out how do we get people to buy into that emotional buy. And I think we're going to do that in the next segment when we come back with our two experts here. So when we come back, we'll have more with Michael Johnson and Neville Pockroy. We have lots more on our next In Business. You should tune in at the end of the show. We'll tell you about next week's show as well. And we'll be back with our guests right after the break. Business in the studio, we have Michael Johnson of Trias College and Neville Pockroy of Mastermind Solutions. And our topic today is the psychology of marketing. So we're talking about the brain, how the brain's working, how we translate that brain thing over to the practical side of the marketing plan. Now, how do we do that, Michael? How do we make that transition?
You know, that's a really intriguing question.
I try to ask the best on In Business.
I think one of the key elements here that science has discovered is that visual references, especially visual, because it takes 2 100 millionths of a second for a visual image to be recorded by the brain, but it takes almost 500 times that amount for the body to react to it. So anything that you can create that's a visual image is going to be recorded immediately. The second most powerful is scent. And you may have noticed magazines actually putting a variety of scents in. It has an ability to cause the individual to relive those experiences with that product. So it's a really interesting way of doing things. And the third one, of course, is auditory. If they hear something pleasurable, they tend to respond to it immediately.
I would have thought it would have been visual, then auditory, and then into the scent.
Yeah, no,
but it's not. It's the other way around.
It's the other way around, yeah.
Wow. So, Neville, how do we use these visual and all of these senses when we're putting together a marketing strategy for a business?
Well, I think you really need to get to understand the way your customers think. The easier... The better you can understand your customer, the easier it is going to be to create campaigns, marketing plans that satisfy those customers' needs. And very often, organizations tend to think about trying to sell things as opposed to trying to find out what the customer needs really are and then providing products and services in order to satisfy those needs. And making sure that you're concentrating in on understanding the customer needs is absolutely crucial, because no one is going to buy something they don't want.
Right.
So if you can really get into the mind of your customer and really understand how they think, you can create products and services that satisfy that need. Whether it happens to be through research or just simple interviewing in a store, there are lots of techniques that allow you to get into your customers' minds.
On a previous show, we had John Wright from Ipsos Reid, who co-authored the book We Know What You're Thinking, and he had some really interesting stories about how we find out why people do what they do. In the business world, how can we find those things out, Mike? With focus groups, would that be a good way to start?
Focus groups is a great way to start. However, I would also turn to the scientific side of it. You may have remembered Candid Camera. Mm-hmm. Years and years ago, he decided, Alan Funt, to go to England where they had a subsidiary, and they were selling something absolutely remarkable on the street, which means that virtually anyone might buy. They had little bags, and they had an individual selling these wonderful stockings, and they would take a knife, and they would run it through to show people that it didn't actually run. And people were buying them by the hundreds, even though they couldn't see it. It was a few years ago that some rather fascinating science came out of that. They discovered that two parts of the brain become very active when something of an ambiguous nature takes place. And this is also why people will buy something even though they don't want it. They discovered the first part of the brain was confusion. They could see that there was an ambiguity, there are invisible stockings, and there's nothing there, but people are absolutely buying them. And the second part of the brain was the most peculiar of all. That was the part of the brain that said there's physical pain because I'm not involved. So the intriguing thing here is that people were buying even though they didn't want to buy, and they were collectively moving towards that product only because the brain was telling them, if you're not part of the group, if you're not buying with the rest of the social group, you're in physical pain.
You're going to be an outcast.
You're an outcast.
You're left behind.
That's right.
I'm glad my wife can't see this show right now because she would accuse me of that, just buying stuff that I really don't need at all. Neville, when it comes to things like that, how do we translate those types? I mean, we've all kinds of business ideas, like pet rocks. I remember pet rocks. People buying pet rocks. What the heck would you buy a pet rock for? But they sold millions of them. How do we translate those things into our marketing plans?
Well, I think you need to decide whether you're a business that sells fad products, mm-hmm. or you're a business that has a long-term vision of selling consistent products or services. You've got the pitchmen of this world who are out there really doing a great job about pitching products that very often people look at once they've made the purchase and say, well, that's great, did I really need it? At the end of the day, if you're the business that's promoting those products, it's great for you if you've decided that you're part of that market, that's the kind of product you want to sell. The majority of businesses don't fit into that kind of group. The majority of the businesses sell products day in and day out. Right. And they're fairly consistent.
And when we come back, we're going to talk about how color fits into this whole plan. We'll have more with Michael Johnson and Neville Pockroy right here on In Business, right after the break. Back to In Business. In the studio, we have Michael Johnson of Treehouse College and Neville Pockroy of Mastermind Solutions. And our topic today is the psychology of marketing. So we've had great discussion about the brain and how we can translate that into a real-life marketing plan. In advertising, and Mike, you were talking about the visual sense and how critical that is to marketing. Let's talk about color, because we use color in all different kinds of advertising, on the television, in print ads, all over the place. And certain colors mean certain things, And I wrote down a few: black authority, white is purity, gray is practical, red draws attention. Does this mean the same thing to all people?
Unfortunately, no. It would be wonderful if it fit everyone. But the realities are certain colors have slightly different connotation. Number one, black, authority, and yet in some cases it might be considered to be horrifying. White, being purity, is also considered to be death, dependent on that particular culture. The other interesting thing is you mentioned red. Well, red is associated with sexual aspects. However, red is also used in restaurants where you want people to leave.
Oh, is that right?
You want them to come in and then leave very quickly, because red is a very hard color to actually look at for a long period of time. Often put in washrooms where they want you to go in, do your business, and leave again.
Right.
Or if the restaurant wants you to go in and buy something really quickly, and then, yes, you spent your money, now get out.
Now get out.
So they paint everything red.
So how do we take that color? So you make a very, very good point that we might think we're attracting one ethnic group or one demographic, and really what we're doing is we're pushing them away, and they may be the ones that we need to do that with. From a strategic point of view, Neville, from an advertising point of view, under the marketing umbrella, how do we employ those colors generically, and how long do we have to actually get somebody's attention with an ad?
David, these days I don't think there's anything generic because we are such a multicultural society. It goes back to really understanding who your customer is. And there may be different ethnic groups or different groups within your target audience that you may need to do something a little bit differently for each one of them. Once you have an understanding of what will motivate one, and it may end up demotivating a different one. So at the end of the day, you have to make sure you are addressing your customer and really knowing them. From the point of view of how long do we have to catch their attention, the way media is going right now and how overwhelming it's becoming to the average person, less and less time to gain their attention. And it's not only just on the advertising side, but these days people use their prime source of information, the internet. So when they go and they search on the internet, by the time that website comes up, you've got a few seconds to catch their attention. Otherwise, they're off and they're looking somewhere else.
And Mike, so this becomes extremely important. The internet is a perfect example, and I've watched the advertising that my 17-year-old daughter watches and my 24-year-old daughter watches, and the stuff is just like it's coming at them so rapidly. And at my tender age of 30 euro, I would find that extremely hard to watch and take in all of that information. Tell us what's going on in my brain, or not going on in there.
One of the beautiful things about the internet is this absolute plethora of knowledge. It's just astronomical how much is available. However, there's a rather fascinating shift that's taking place. The younger people are not spending the hours on the internet as they would have if they were in their 20s. And the people who are in their 30s are spending even less time. What's actually taking place is they're beginning to go to their cell phones. And they're beginning to use texting rather than voice, which is rather intriguing diversion from the internet. They still use it, but they use it in slightly different ways. They're looking for specific detail. They're looking for less contact with other people, vocal contact, which is interesting because I did a little experiment with a couple of hundred students. And we've discovered that they do text 90% of the time. 10% is voice. And they do use the internet, but very infrequently. They're only looking for specific detail they want in and they want out. So it's really fact-based that they're looking for.
So again, going back to the point, really knowing who your customer is.
Yeah, and more importantly than that, it's knowing how your customer thinks, because I think what Mike's saying is absolutely correct. And as a business, you need to take that into consideration, that new generation is consuming media in a very different way than the older generation. And as over time, that new generation is going to become a bigger percentage of most companies' customers. They're also going to be moving in as employees. So it's really important that companies get a real understanding about how those people think. It's going to influence their lives dramatically in the future.
We've only got a few seconds to go, but so who's driving the trend? Is it the advertisers driving the trend, or is it the consumer driving the trend?
I think the consumer more and more is driving the trend, and that's going to grow over time.
Mike?
Advertiser.
Well, this might be a whole other discussion for another show. We're out of time. I got to say goodbye. Thanks to my special panel guests, Neville Pockroy of Mastermind Solutions and Michael Johnson from Trias College. If you have a question for us at In Business or an idea for the show, go to our website, www.rogerstv.com. We'll be back after a few words with our sponsors.